you're not really helping the whole this is not time travel thing when you play those sound bites, because that actually is from like 2016.
Well, I didn't expect this to happen. I mean, I think that's an indicator of how surprised I was at how quickly this all came together. It seemed like, I mean, it felt like even Rod Boone believed that all of this was gravitating towards a Mike D'Antoni hire, and then in just a matter of hours, it felt like, oh nope, it's Steve Clifford.
Well, and Mitch Kupchak tried to warn us, and I think it's not like we didn't accept it, but Kupchak saying, in fact, we might even have a curveball coming at you. Like that's kind of the funny stuff that Kupchak will bring to you. It's a curveball. You know, we saw the report from Mark Stein first. He said, here's something surprising. Steve Clifford news came across my table. You know, maybe that's something that could happen with the Charlotte Hornets. Nah, that's kind of crazy. It's hilarious that it's happening, but it's not actually going to take place where they hire Steve Clifford. And sure,
it doesn't happen a lot in the NBA.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, we were looking it up before the show. Don Nelson, Phil Jackson are examples. Obviously, Paul Silas with the Hornets / Bobcats, but the franchise moved away before. At least there was some weird separation between that example. But it happens more it feels like it happens more in the other sports. NFL, MLB, NHL have multiple examples of this occurring. There's not a tradition really of this in the NBA.
Well, and the names you mentioned, Phil Jackson, Don Nelson, Lenny Wilkens is somebody we came across before we hopped on the show. All of those coaches are in a tier that are considered the best coaches of all time. Lenny Wilkens, I believe, is, I think Pop may have passed him, but one of the most winningest coaches of all time. Phil Jackson speaks for itself. Don Nelson is one of the more adaptive guys, innovative thinking coaches to ever be in the NBA. Lots of wins. So these guys are established legends that get a second chance after they leave for whatever reason. Maybe their message runs out after a decade with that team. Right. But the Hornets franchise, they've done it twice. They bring back Paul Silas, who is a Charlotte legend in his own right. It felt a little different. It felt like, hey, Dad, can I move in after college for these next couple of years just to get my feet on the ground, and then I'll move out of the house? Where this one is like, goodness gracious, we need somebody to help everything a part of this. It feels like we wanted to take that step, and then here's Steve Clifford coming in unexpectedly. You know, he's the relative that moves in where, wait, what? I haven't seen you in 3 years. Very weird scenario. All right, Doug, you wanted to run down the players and say who it's good for, who it's not, who it's questionable for. Doug, LaMelo Ball, what's your take on? There. Yep. All right. So LaMelo Ball, is this hire good for the star of this franchise?
I think it can be. I'm leaving open the possibility that this could be good for a LaMelo Ball. So I put him in both categories. It could be a good hire for LaMelo Ball, could be a bad hire. I think it's interesting that in the press release that Mitch Kupchak sent out on the Steve Clifford hire, he made a point to mention that Steve Clifford would be upholding the level of pace of play that developed under Borrego, because as much as he gives the latitude to point guards like Kemba Walker, those teams weren't known necessarily for getting up and down the floor. It was an express goal of Clifford's to make that happen, but it just didn't often happen. And it wasn't until the later years of James Borrego that we saw this team actually play in transition a ton. And I think that has to do a lot with the low turnover situation that Steve Clifford wants to foster. So I think it could be good for LaMelo in that it's going to bring a little bit of discipline to a team that needs a lot of discipline. And he does give wide latitude to point guards. Why I say it could be bad, Walker, is if that focus on low turnover takes away that improvisation, that freedom that LaMelo plays with, that makes him so good, and that LaMelo sort of internally understands is part of what makes him good and loves that, then I think there could be some friction there.
Yeah, there absolutely could be. I'm a little scared about the Melo relationship, which is ultimately a big fear because he's the star of this franchise. I'm scared because Steve Clifford has demonstrated he wants players on the floor that defend, and you keep using the word disciplined, which is something we said was the exact opposite of how LaMelo Ball played defense last year. Regardless if you think he's a good defensive player, right? He did not play disciplined. He would leave his man, he would go out, and he would get the basketball from some of the big guys not paying attention. Some of that stuff is what made LaMelo great, and it would turn into points and transition points for the Charlotte Hornets. Sometimes he'd leave a 5-on-4 situation where he'd have to rush back. If that happens too many times, is Steve Clifford going to become increasingly angry? I can't envision Steve Clifford. I mean, maybe I can, to be honest with you, but man, it would have to be pretty bad for him to sit LaMelo for a large quantity of time. But there could be some real problems behind the scenes if LaMelo doesn't stay in his spot he's supposed to in a half-court defensive setting, and I'm scared about that, Doug.
There were instances last season where Borrego tried to hold him accountable within a game and sat him, and then I think did the right thing, which was, hey, we're going to sit you for a few minutes, and then eventually kind of work this out in the game and in the off season. So, I'm totally with you, Walker. And I think it's all going to come down to Steve Clifford's ability to get through to a player. So what gives me a little bit of hope, again, is going back to that situation with Kemba Walker, where Kemba was coming off. I mean, he just dominated that UConn team and was the UConn Huskies and led them to a national championship. Then comes in the league and struggles a little bit out of the gate with some of those same kind of issues. And Clifford was able to go to him and communicate with him and say, hey, if you trust me here, and just implement these few things, I think I can get you to where you want. I can help you get to where you want to be. And so if Clifford can do that with LaMelo and that relationship is established early, and getting off to a little bit of a late start, obviously, because of all of the hiring issues. But if that relationship forms, it could be powerful. But I get your fear, and I get fear from you're listening out there right now. If you are fearing this, I get it.
Last thing that does give me some hope regarding the Clifford-Melo relationship, all we've heard is that Melo does crave coaching, that he does want to be a lot better. Steve Clifford is a guy that also loves those types of players. So that is something that could work in the favor of this relationship. We'll just have to see how it unfolds.
Which going back to the D'Antoni situation was why I thought because D'Antoni could come in with the credibility. Right? He could come in with the wins. He could come in with the conference championships or a conference, at least playing in the conference championship. Like, he could come in with that credibility. Clifford is going to have to come in and convince him, and maybe bring the Kemba Walker story with him and use some of those kinds of things. But he can't, he's 4 playoff first round exits. Like, he doesn't have, but I'll say this, he has worked with superstars in this league. He was, the direct assistant that worked with Dwight Howard in LA, which I know, that situation did work out, but that guy was a superstar.
And in Orlando, I mean, that's the thing to point to is when Orlando was awesome. That's when
Tracy
Dwight was
McGrady,
a beast.
He often talks about his experience with Tracy McGrady in Houston. So he does have that experience with those superstars. And I always got the sense that Clifford had a good philosophy about going to a player and communicating what they're doing well and what they can improve on, and not go in there with like bluster and say, you did something wrong. He knows that when players are professional, when they've been doing this game for so long, they are a little bit locked into their ways, and convincing them takes a certain amount of savvy. And so I have a little bit of hope. But anyway, I think it could be good, could be bad. We're going to have to see on that one.
All right.
Go through some other players?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's continue the 2017 theme of this show. It is the shirt in which I am wearing. Kemba Walker, the all-time leading scorer for this franchise. Doug, is this a good hire for Kemba Walker? I see it's going down.
I'm yelling, Kemba!
Oh no! Don't. No, the mentioning of it is bad. The singing of it is much worse. Man, Kemba involved in this trade, by the way, where we send Jalen Duren to Detroit. New York doesn't even have first round picks. They're just trying to trade for future assets.
Me doing a chef's kiss. I know that didn't really work well over audio. That's me doing a chef's kiss.
Yeah, I mean, and what's funny is I'm not even watching the video right now. I'm looking at a different tab, so I'm experiencing what the listeners are experiencing. Anyway, Kemba Walker, it's I don't even know if it's already happened, but I know the Pistons are not interested in keeping Kemba on the roster. They're going to buy him out. Going to be the second time that it's happened. OKC did the same thing. I can't put anything past this team. I wouldn't think they'd go after Kemba.
They're in need of a backup point guard.
I got to move on. All right, Doug, here's somebody that is on the roster currently. Who do you think this is going to be really good for?
I think it's going to be good for JT Thor, but more importantly, it's going to be good for the More Thor movement. More Thor, let's go. Because JT Thor is somebody that does play defense. He is somebody that's committed to that end of the floor, plays hard. You know, the minutes that he got last season were a bit limited, but less limited than some of his other young player counterparts. And I think because Borrego trusted that he could use him as a utility tool on defense, I think Clifford will see the same thing. And of the three rookies from last season, I give JT Thor the most chance of playing big minutes this next season, even more than James Bouknight. And I thought that even before the Clifford hire. Now I think it even more.
I agree. And Steve Clifford likes length. He talked about that a couple of times.
Who doesn't?
Throughout his tenure.
Who doesn't? I'm going to put that on the YouTube poll. Who doesn't like length?
It felt like he emphasized it on the defensive end that you have, you know, if you're mobile and you're these big guys, of course, you're going to be a good defender with the right kind of buy-in. All right, let's go through the positives here. And then in the next segment, we'll kind of go through who this hire is bad for. What about the fans? What about some of the fans? What specific fans is this a good hire for, Doug?
I know a lot of fans are groaning right now over this hire. Okay. I mean, I've seen it on social media because this feels like a retread. We're going to get to that in the third segment. There's a little bit of a smell of desperation around this. But if you were a fan last season who actually watched a majority of the games and you groaned every time this Hornets team sometimes they would make a basket and still give up an easy transition bucket. It wasn't even off of misses all of the time. This team was horribly undisciplined in transition, and it cost them games. And they lost a lot of close games last season. And I think you can look back and say, man, if they had just been a little bit more disciplined, we're talking about margin of error thin. They could have been, you know, in the catbird seat in the play-in, or possibly even in that last seed in the playoffs had they made that move. So if you groaned every time the Hornets came up an easy transition bucket, I think you can at least be a little bit happy about this. And then finally, Miles Bridges. To me, Walker, this totally signals that they are going to do whatever it takes to bring back Miles Bridges, because you don't put a coach on a team option contract and not do everything within your power to give him players to actually go and win now. Well, maybe this team is confusing me. Maybe they do that, and that'd be crazy. But at least it would seem like that's what they would want to do, is go, you know, re-sign Miles, whatever it takes.
Again, Miles Bridges napping on defense where he lets guys cut back door. It's not going to go over well.
Feels like he wants to improve that, though.
But no, 100%. Yeah, right. Exactly. So maybe Steve Clifford, Miles Bridges are able to cook something up to where he is able to get better there.
I know he didn't. But doesn't it feel like Miles Bridges played for Clifford? I get that he didn't, because it was that transition from Mitch Kupchak into Borrego into Miles.
I had to think about it. I had to think about it for a second, and then I had to go back to James Borrego talking about Miles Bridges, saying he's always going to have a special relationship with that player because they came in at the exact same time.
But but
I had to think about it too. Yeah, because Miles he's the guy that's played for the Hornets the longest. He's number one. He has played for this franchise the longest. I do think offensively, getting downhill and attacking in space, that's going to work well with Steve Clifford, because I kind of compare Miles to MKG in that respect, right? Mm-hmm. Where MKG's his sole purpose of offense was to get to the basket. He was athletic. He made smart cuts. I think Miles has clearly more ability to handle the basketball, but also his best is when you have the freight train coming down. And I think Clifford is probably, you know, good at free throws, right? Free throws work in the NBA. I think Clifford offensively is going to be able to work with Miles Bridges pretty damn well.
Well, let me just say this. If the Hornets improve their record, they get into the playoffs, it's going to be because I think Miles Bridges elevates his game into all-star level territory. And I think that happens on the defensive end of the floor. So if all of this is successful somehow with this Steve Clifford hire, and we all forget about how embarrassing this whole situation has been, it's because Miles Bridges has elevated his game. If they don't re-sign Miles Bridges, then I just have no idea what they're doing. I really don't. How do you hire a coach in win now mode and then not go and retain one of the best players on the team?